Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie here with the Story a Day podcast, and I'm back to talk to you this week about habits again. Talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about digging into BJ Fogg's new book, Tiny Habits. And as you can tell, I really liked it. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit again this week because we are a couple of weeks into January. If you fell victim to the clean slate, I'm going to do it all differently this year thing, and you set yourself some goals and some habits that you wanted to change, you might be, let's say, drifting a little by now. I know from doing the Story a Day challenge every year that this is right when it gets difficult, right in the middle of the month. And this is the middle of the first month of 2020. So I wanted to talk about not how you can give up on your habits or how you can go gung-ho and do it all perfectly again, but how you might take some of what I've been reading about in BJ Fogg's book and use it to reboot whatever habits that you wanted to start or improve, specifically to do with your writing. We talked 2 weeks ago in episode 150 about how behaviour is sort of an intersection or a mixing board of the three things that BJ Fogg talks about as motivation. Like, we're good at motivation around here. We talk about yay, rah, rah, we want to be writing. But it's a mix of that with your ability to get the work done. Not just talent, but your ability in the moment to get the work done. Is your desk a mess? Can you not find your pen that you prefer to write with? Can you not find the file you were working on? Is it physically difficult for you to get somewhere? Is it mentally difficult for you to summon up the energy today? Is it just that you don't have any time? So all kinds of things that impact your ability to get the work done. And the third factor is, do you have a prompt that's going to make you do a thing? You can have the best intentions in the world, but if you do not have the prompt that tells you to do it, then it's much, much more likely that the thing you want to do is not going to get done. So if you had an intention to write every day, write something every day, I'll just write something every day. If you don't actually have that dialed into all of these three mixers, then it's quite likely that by now that aspiration has fallen by the wayside, because that's what it was. It was an aspiration, not a behaviour. So let's talk about that a little bit. Motivation. If you are lacking in motivation and you're like, I just don't want to write today, then maybe it's okay for you not to write today. But if you've set yourself the intention of building a behaviour where you do write every day, or you write Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or you write after dinner on these specific days, then you do want to try and get yourself writing even when you're not actually motivated to do it. So there's some tricks that I've always recommended for getting your motivation high, which are, reading some writing that you love, reading some writing by a writer that you hate and think, how did this jerk get published? Listening to podcasts like this, listening to authors talk about getting excited about their writing. All kinds of things you can use for motivation. You can watch a really great TV show with great storytelling. You can read books. You can listen to some high energy music and get yourself up. You can have a cup of coffee if you want to. Not advocating drugging yourself and using artificial stimulants, but sometimes, yourself what you need to do to get yourself into a physical state where you're supporting your brain and you can feel good enough to do the writing. So there's lots of ways that you can get motivation. There's tons of articles of Story a Day. There's tons of old episodes of this podcast where you can get motivation. So let's not spend too much time on that. The things I wanted to stress are ability and putting the prompt into your day that will get you to do the thing that you want to do. So ability is more than just your talent. I read a fantastic quote from George Saunders, who's a short story writer I really like. He did an interview in the Paris Review, and I should have the quote in front of me, but I don't, so I'll paraphrase. He said, mastery is basically bunk. Nobody ever masters writing. Every story is different. Every time you sit down to write a new story, you might have learned some tips and tricks in your last story that helped you get to the end of that one. But this new story, it's going to require all new tips and tricks. You always feel like a beginner. You always feel like you don't know what you're doing. Now, for some of us, that's actually quite exciting, as long as we remember that it's okay, that the mindset needs to be right, that it's okay that we kind of don't know what we're doing. It's exciting. That's one of the things that lights us up, is the act of discovery. We're probably lifelong learners. We're probably curious. It can be as frustrating as anything to sit down and write a new story and realise that everything you learned on the last story isn't actually going to solve these problems. But George Saunders ends that part of his quote by saying, anyone who thinks otherwise basically is a hack. So you'll see there are writers that don't get a lot of respect because every book is the same. And maybe they need to find a huge audience to be constantly delighting new readers who read 4 or 5 of their books and then get bored of them. That's one way of running a writing career, but it's not necessarily what's going to make everyone happy. So ability. Don't fret if you feel like you don't know what you're doing. Everyone feels like that. The other things that fall under ability are, do you have time? Have you put time aside to write? Do you have the money to do what you need? With writing, that's generally not something that comes up too much, because you don't need Scrivener. You don't need a computer. You need a pen, you need a pencil, you need a piece of paper, and a little bit of time. So that's, I think, with most writers, the time and money equation go together, because usually what's eating into our time is the necessity to make money so that we can eat and have a roof over our heads. Often it's also family obligations, but money isn't such a huge distraction for writers, except in the sense that it takes up time. But if you haven't set aside time, if you're finding it hard to write and you're just and you haven't thought through the timing of it, you don't need 90 minutes. It can be great to sit down and write for 90 minutes or 3 hours, and I love it when I get a chance to do that. If you don't have that kind of thing, then you need to put some other things in place so that you can cram writing into shorter bursts during your day, which means you're going to need to be a little more organised. You're going to need to have your story thought through. You're going to need to know what you're going to work on next time you get 15 minutes to write. So time is a factor in why your habit might not be sticking. And if it is that you need to write in short bursts, then make sure you're organised before you sit down to write. Know what you're going to be writing next. And same with big writing windows as well. Another aspect of your ability to write is physical. If you walk in to the space where you normally write and somebody has piled laundry on top of your desk, and you have to deal with that before you get to sit down and write, whether it's sweeping it on the floor or yelling at someone to take it away or folding it and putting it away yourself, that is a huge obstacle. That's a physical obstacle to your ability to get your habit done. So think about ways that you could create a physical environment, even if it's just a little corner where your notebook sits, and there's always enough space for your notebook to sit at the angle you like to write, or for, that your computer is always, your laptop's always charged, or whatever you use. Think about what physical barriers you're putting between yourself and your ability to form a writing habit, and see what you can do to fix them. It can be something tiny, like making space for your laptop and putting dire warnings around it, saying to people, do not use this space. The mental effort to write can also be a barrier if you're not making your writing habit stick. This one's tough because there's such a spectrum of mental ability, mood, and issues and health. But think about what you need to do to get yourself into a place where you can go into your imaginary world. Maybe there's a transition you need to make between your everyday life and your writing world. Maybe you light a candle, maybe you breathe deeply for a few minutes, maybe you put on big headphones so that everybody knows that's kind of physical and mental, but put on headphones and listen to some uplifting music, and that's your commute to your writing habit. And the other part of it is to do with your routine. If you don't have much of a routine, it can be really difficult to make a habit stick. And I say this from the heart because I have been trying to think of things that I do on a routine basis that I can stack other habits on top of, and I don't have many. I'm at home all day. I don't have a lot of schedule being imposed on me. I'm very free to do things in any order I want, which means that I have no routine, which means that things can get a little out of control. So if you're like me, I'm going to talk next about the things that BJ Fogg talks about in his book Tiny Habits that help you do that. I thought I didn't have many routines, but when he talks about routines, things that you do routinely, he's talking about stuff like going to the bathroom, right? If every time you close the bathroom door behind you, you do whatever habit is that you want to do, whether it is saying an affirmation, I am a writer, or whether it is every time I close the bathroom door, I will think through the next plot point for the thing I want to write this evening. Also, when you get up in the morning, you put your feet on the floor. And if you go to sleep the night before and you say to yourself, when I wake up in the morning, as soon as I put my feet on the floor, I will do one tiny thing that will enhance your writing habit. That's a really powerful way to build habits and prompts into your life, even if your life is kind of chaotic and creative and out there and not very routine. And if you are the kind of person whose day is rigidly scheduled, and you think that you don't have time to change any or introduce any new behaviours, highly recommend this book, Tiny Habits, because he will show you how to scale back anything that you want to do to the minimum viable version of that. So let's go to comments that people have sent me. Somebody said, I'm a slow writer and I struggle to get a story down. It's both overwhelming and frustrating. Yes, absolutely. And if your goal is to go straight into writing a story a day, like if you haven't heard of me until April the 30th and all of a sudden you're like, yes, May is here, I will write a story a day next month, that is going to be a bit of a shock to the system. And yes, you might get overwhelmed trying to write a story a day. So one of the things I always offer at Story a Day is a tiny prompt as a fallback. Write a 1-sentence story, write a 2-sentence story, write a Twitter story, write a 55-word story, write a 100-word story. Anything you can do to set your minimum win, your tiny win, to something that's ridiculously small so that you can't possibly wiggle your way out of it. Your brain can't make an excuse. If you say to yourself, all I have to do today is write 1 sentence and I have victory, then the chances of you actually doing that are high. Now you might say, what am I going to achieve by writing 1 sentence every day? You're going to achieve the habit of taking your writing seriously. You're going to achieve the habit of writing something even when you're not in the mood. You're going to achieve the pattern in your brain of writing even when you are not inspired, when you're grumpy, when you don't think you've possibly got time to do it. You keep the pattern going and you build a habit. So if you're overwhelmed, set your tiny, tiny goal as your tiny win. Somebody else wrote that they have trouble with beginning and trouble with finishing because they always needed to know the end of the story before they started. They also said that going through the process of Story a Day helped kind of cure them of that a little bit, which is great, especially the ending part. And beginning, I think also if you have a deadline, if you have a deadline and a prompt, somebody saying to you, okay, go write today's story, then that's great. So I have 2 things to say about that. One is that if you have a problem with openings, that's really common because openings are important and they carry a lot of weight and they do a lot for the story, so they can get a bit intimidating. And I always recommend not worrying too much about your opening line. You can write Once Upon a Time to open every story you ever write and go back in afterwards and fix it and make it better. If you would like to see examples of short story openings that other people have written and have won awards for and have had collected in anthologies, you can get my Mastering Opening Lines report. If you go to stada.me, S-T-A-D-A, stada.me/openings report, and you can just pop your email address in there and I will send you a document that has like at least 10, I forget how many, 10 opening lines that have been selected for publication. And I look at how and why they work, what they do, what they achieve. And just reading through that will give you some ideas of how to make your own openings better. But honestly, you can write your openings and endings as Once Upon a Time and Happily Ever After or Everyone Died, or just write down, here's the mood I want to leave readers with at the end of this story, and then let it sit for a couple of days and come back to it. So there are some ideas on how to get over that hurdle. Another hurdle that people had with making their short story habit stick was finding a subject to write about. Now, I know that sounds funny to some of you because some of you have too many ideas and not enough time, but some people, you carve out the time to write and you sit down and it suddenly gets a little overwhelming. That's the kind of ability to write. We were talking about motivation, ability, and prompts. This is a mental ability barrier. So here's a thing I suggest is wandering around the world collecting 3 story sparks a day. And I've written about story sparks at Story a Day a lot. And you can actually download the Story a Day Creativity Bundle and get a Story Sparks booklet that you can fold. And there's instructions for how to fold it. You can fold it and you can stick it in your pocket. And you could build a little habit into your day where you keep that in your pocket. And every time you stick your hand in your pocket, or open your phone wallet or whatever, whenever you see it, you write down something that you heard or saw or are looking at right now from the real world that you can take and turn into a detail in a story or a spark for a story or something to make your story more rich. So if you want to get that, you can get the Creativity Bundle at Stada, again, stad.me/creativity bundle. So I'm running out of time. There was one more thing that I wanted to talk about. Somebody wrote and said that they have trouble actually showing up to write, which is a sort of fundamental problem that is based on a lack of a prompt. And I meant to talk about this earlier. So the prompt that you need is not, I'm not talking about a writing prompt where I say, write a story about 2 people in a cavern. It can be that. External prompts can work. And if I send you a prompt every Wednesday and you open up your email every Wednesday and there's a prompt for me and you always write it, then that will be great. That will build a habit of always writing to the prompt on Wednesdays. That's external. That's fine. You can also have external context prompts by having alarms on your phone or sticky notes, but there's a danger with that kind of thing that you stop seeing them. I certainly do. There's another type of prompt that you can use where you just say to yourself, I'm going to remember that every morning I get up and write, or I'm going to remember that after dinner on Tuesdays I'm going to write. As I tend to tell my kids, no, you're not. You're not going to remember. Like without an external prompt or some other kind of prompt, you're not going to remember. Now, I have a sort of genetic disposition to not remember things. I get very distracted and I get very into what I'm working on and days could go by and I would not remember that I thought I was going to remember something. You may be a little more different. You may have a strong personality prompt that you can tell yourself you'll do something and you'll do it, and good for you if you have. I envy you. But there's another type of prompt that's one that, again, BJ Fogg talks about in Tiny Habits, where he talks about an action-based prompt. And that was what I was talking about before. Like, when you put your feet on the floor, you will do something. When you close the bathroom door behind you, you will think about your plot. And like, I didn't say when I wash my hands in the bathroom or when I flush or whatever. I said close the door behind me as I leave the bathroom, because that is the last thing that is part of that whole process for me. So if I tie thinking about my plot to the clunk of the door closing, then I will always do it. I don't have to remember to do it. I don't have to see the sticky note. I don't have to look at my phone and see the thing popping up at 1 o'clock asking me if I want to meditate, which I always ignore. But if I get myself in the habit of every time my feet hit the floor, I think about my current plot, then that works pretty well. So, the other question that came in was one about finding their voice, which isn't so much a question about, or it's not. The answer isn't so much about building habits, but the act of building a writing habit and writing more will help you get to your voice. But of course, I do have a tool for you, which is available. If you want to play a little game and figure out what kinds of stories come naturally to you, what kind of voice you might be aiming for, I have this writer quiz. It's one of those personality quiz things like, which Harry Potter character are you, that kind of thing. My quiz is which famous writer are you? And it'll tell you which sort of bucket or genre you fall into. And I'd be very interested to hear from you if that resonates with you and if that feels right to you. Because it's very powerful to be able to say no to things. Saying, I'm not going to write literary fiction because you know what, that's not really how my stories come out and I'm not particularly interested in it anyway. I'm going to write romance. That's absolutely fine. So take the quiz by going to stada.me, storyaday.me, stada, STADA.me/writer quiz. And I'd be interested to hear back from you what you think of that. Okay, that is it for this week. I hope that you are enjoying your new habits. I hope that you have some inspiration from this on how to tweak the things that you're trying and maybe put some new twists on what you're trying to get more writing done, because your voice matters and the world needs your stories. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week and of course, keep writing.